Hi, and welcome back to The Current. This is Chris Nafis, pastor of Living Water Church, joining you once again. And today I have a special guest that joined me in conversation, the Reverend Dr. Cari Willis. She's a chaplain to those on death row and just genuinely an amazing person. We get to talk a little bit about what it's like to be on the row, what folks who know that their execution is coming are processing, how they're thinking about what they've done, what's happened to them in their life, bearing the trauma and the moral injury of all of it, and how Carrie's able to do this work and remain sort of faithful and hopeful and revitalized herself. We had a great conversation about the potential for redemption and hope, even for those on the row. So enjoy it. Here it is. All right. Well, uh, thank you for joining me, Carrie. If for those who are new to meeting Cari Willis, which is probably most of you, Carrie and I met in Divinity School when we were at Duke together. We were both part of like the back row crew in the gen ed classes. You know, there are these big lecture halls, and there's 150 students or whatever, and there was just a crew of us that every class we just kind of sat in the back. I don't. Those of you at church don't know this about me because I'm always up front, but I'm a back dweller. I like to be in the back. I like to see everybody. And Carrie also was back there, and we had a little cluster of us that just kind of became friends. Carrie's one of the just most authentic and genuine people that you'll ever meet in your life. She just kind of emanates love in everything that she does, and really glad to have you. Thanks for joining me, Carrie.
Thank you, Chris.
Um,
Very
so,
kind.
and thank you for being a guinea pig on this. I mentioned this before we started recording, but like I'm new at this. We're trying Zoom. This is the first Zoom interview we've done, so hopefully it comes out okay. But you are a chaplain on death row
Yeah,
you said 8 different states now.
8 different states.
So between we haven't really connected a super amount. I've followed you on Facebook since Divinity School, but how did you end up doing that? Like how'd you fall into that work?
So I had just quit my nonprofit job because I had liver surgery that didn't go well. And so I'm sitting out on my back porch and I get a call from somebody in Virginia. And you know how it is nowadays. You don't actually ever answer the phone for a number you don't know. And
Right.
yet I was like, there's something about this number. I don't know. I'm going to pick it up. And it was a lawyer in Virginia who had been looking for 3 years for somebody to go see her client, and nobody would go. She
Hmm.
couldn't find anybody. And I was like, have you talked to the bishops? Have you talked to the district superintendents? Have you done this? Have you done that? And she had literally scoured the landscape and found nobody.
Wow.
So I said, listen, I'm not in any position to go, but I will find somebody. And I had put together a list of 20 people, but month after month and requirement after requirement that came in from the prison in Virginia, at the end of the day, I was the only one that was qualified to go.
Wow.
And so there on a very, very snowy and sleety day, I drove up to Virginia and met with 2 guys, one of them being obviously her client, and just fell in love, just
Hmm.
absolutely fell in love with these men, and just had amazing conversations, and been doing it ever since. So
Wow. Wow. Well, yeah. And what was it like going in for like the first time? I mean, was it nerve wracking?
so
Would you feel good?
I actually I have on my Facebook page no fear, right?
Hmm.
So it's my cover page. I really don't fear going into a prison. It, obviously it's a maximum security prison, so they, will you go through, like the airport, and then they pat you down and make sure you don't bring in any contraband.
Uh-huh.
Especially up in Virginia because they were contact visits, is what they were called. So I would actually meet in a little room right off death row. And death row was shaped in a kind of a triangle, and I was in a little corner, and so I could hug the guys and,
Hmm.
when I first saw them and them right before they left. And so they were worried, like, this is contraband, by the way, Kleenex. They had to make sure that if I brought in Kleenex, I did not hand it to the offender, because that's a felony in
Oh my
Virginia.
gosh.
So it's crazy stuff. But it was just other than the pat down, I mean, it really isn't much of anything. You usually are escorted, by a correctional officer on the way back if the housing unit's in the back of the unit. But other than that, it's all kind of normal procedure.
Kind of feels like a normal check-in. You just kind of come in and then
Yeah.
you see these guys that kind of pegged as, death row, as kind of has this heavy feeling to it. But then of course
Yes.
they're humans like everybody else. And
Right.
I'm guessing that's your aim, is to kind of meet them on that level and process this
Mhm.
like really significant thing that they're going through.
Yes, right. And I tell the guys I actually don't look up their crimes before I visit them.
Mhm.
I actually don't look up their crimes at any point. I don't want to meet a crime. I want to meet a person. I want
So,
to, because they are not the worst thing they've ever done. They are a
mhm.
human being, like you're saying, with dignity and worth. And so I want to meet that person when I go in. Um, and that, as soon as I tell them that, they just like it just like really helps to, lessen their anxiety with me and just feel like, okay, this is somebody who really just wants to be there for me. Who won't read the media, because like what you're saying, like we want to make them out to be the worst of the worst and these monsters.
Mhm.
I have yet to have a friend or meet a person on the road that I would consider to be a monster
Yeah.
or like the worst person. Have my friends done awful things? Yes, they have, but they have they are so different than the crime that they committed. And so that's the person I get to meet, and they're I find them to be amazing, absolutely amazing. So,
I'm guessing they don't get that opportunity very often. I mean, maybe not everyone they know immediately knows like what they've done specifically, but you're if that's kind of your context, that's where you live. Everybody that you encounter is in that same context. You probably have
yes.
like a lot of assumptions about you, and a lot, you're kind of pegged with this aspect of your life, this one event, or I don't know if everybody's situation, maybe people have had multiple events that were part of their crime or whatever, but this one little season in their life comes to dictate everything. And these guys are on the road for a long
Yes.
time, right?
Yes, sometimes the guys can be on the road for 30, 40 years. It just
Wow.
depends on whether the state is actively executing the guys or not. Um, in Virginia, my friend who was executed was on the road from not even 10 years.
Hmm.
They were, very quickly going through the appeals, and they were quickly executing the guys. In North Carolina, there is a hiatus on the death penalty, and so some of the guys have been there for over 40 years. The average is probably 30,
Okay.
25 to 30, something like that. So,
So it's a long time. So some of these guys are meeting, like they're pretty far away from the thing that happened to them. They're immersed in a
right,
whole new world, and
right. Right,
prison life is its own thing.
their grandfathers, some of them even great grandfathers, right? So, I mean, a lot has happened in their family life and, all sorts of things. So,
Do they have much access to the outside world? Typically, probably every state's maybe a little different.
so, with the advent of tablets, they now have, basically like iPads. They're bigger than the smartphone, and they can call. Most of them can call from the tablet, and all of them can email from the tablet. And so now uh, they have access to family that they didn't have access to before.
Wow.
Phones. Uh, Phones, actually, like in Texas, it used to be that the guys could make a 5-minute phone call, 1 5-minute phone call every Sunday. And if you called and you didn't get anybody, that was, tough luck. In North Carolina, they could only call their loved ones on Christmas Day for 15 minutes. And
Um,
again, if they didn't get them, then tough luck. And now all of a sudden they have these tablets and they can, like on North Carolina's death row, they can call all during the day. And And they love it. I mean, so contact all of a sudden is like, wow, I can call my family and my friends, my spiritual advisors, whoever. And it's made a huge difference.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that I mean, I can see that'd be a huge difference just to have suddenly to have access to all these people in your life.
Yeah.
It's probably a complicated difference. I imagine it's mostly good things, but then all of a sudden you're back into the family drama, and I imagine a lot of these folks are coming from, tougher backgrounds and stuff.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
so yeah, well, like, so what are the challenges? What are the joys? Like, what's good? What's beautiful? What's hard about this kind of work? Most of us haven't. And I'm also a hospital chaplain. I don't know if you even know that, but
Yeah.
there's something about being in someone's kind of worst moment, which is
Yeah.
unique. I think you're in a place where people are there more long term, and like as you said, they've had years to process this. But there's
One.
there's something intense about that whole experience and kind of creating some space to process spiritually what's happening. Yeah,
Right.
like just tell us about the work. What do you love? What do you
Right.
frustrate?
Right. And so, they do need to do a lot of processing. I use Psalm 42 a lot, deep calls to deep, that
Uh-huh.
they see that there's a depth in me that is calling to the depth in them, and that
Mhm.
we can have like really serious, really dark, even what people would consider to be dark conversations. Most of these guys have serious, I mean, horrific actually, childhood trauma. And so they need to understand like what happened and why did it happen, and where was God in the midst of, their father, beating them almost to death, and or the sexual trauma that happened. And that all needs to be processed. It all needs to be seen, felt, and heard, like,
Mhm.
right? And they need to have that person to really be there with them. And So I do a lot of that. I sit in their worst moments.
Mhm.
Some of them obviously need to also process their crime, and if they want to talk about their crime, that is um that's fine with me too, like because their crime is typically playing in their heads over and over and over again, and they can't get it to stop. It's really awful. And again, that they need to talk that through and understand, like, why did they do what they did.
Yeah.
And so I think, the thing that um they cherish the most about me is that I am willing to sit in the space, in the dark space. I say there's three things to pastoral care: show up, sit down, and stay silent.
Mhm. Yep.
And so I'm actually here in Texas. That's why I have like all this stuff behind me. Um, and I believe in showing up, like that matters, that it's not just an email that will do it, but we need to have, face to face to talk about their lives.
For sure.
And I don't I'm not one of those who is, tries to make things better. I don't try to turn the light on. I
Mhm.
will just sit in their darkness, and just allow that to have its own voice. And so, we do a lot of that. I've also witnessed two executions, and obviously that is exceptionally difficult to watch.
Yeah.
A friend of yours, a most beloved friend of yours, being killed by the state. I witnessed an execution in Virginia and another in Texas. And I will tell you, there is no good way to kill somebody.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks that IV drugs are, such a wonderful, peaceful way to transition. It's not. It is not. Um, so, those are the difficult moments, the most difficult moments. But the joys are, I get to see transformation. I
Mhm.
get to see resurrection. I get to see redemption. I get to see like men's lives who started out in this really, really dark and, space that you just trust God is going to be in that space. And,
Yeah.
and God's light will shine one day, like, right. And then it happens,
Mm.
and then it's just like, "Oh my gosh," like, and it's just so incredibly joyful because you see a life that just was where they felt like they were a waste of skin to something
Mm.
where they just are really feeling like a beloved child of God, like
Mm.
to their core, and it's beyond anything I can ever say. Like, to see that kind of transformation is just it's astounding. And before my friend went into the death chamber, um, I was sitting with him, and we were told, time's up, and I grabbed his hand, in this
Mm.
little bitty slit, this little slot rather, and I said, "What are you most grateful for right now?"
Um,
Because he always wanted to talk about gratefulness, right?
mhm.
He always wanted to talk about gratefulness. Even at that moment, he wanted to talk about gratefulness. And he said, "I'm grateful for the love of family. I'm grateful for the love of friends, especially for you being here. But most importantly, I'm grateful for the irrational love of God." He said,
Um,
"I feel so much love right now. I'm overwhelmed by it." And those were his final words to me, right? So,
yeah.
so even in the worst moment, there was this love that just you just can't put it in words, like how
Yeah.
much, yeah.
Man,
So,
that's so beautiful and inspiring. I one of the things that I'm hoping to do, and as I get to talk to a bunch of amazing people, is find some parallels with our own work, and in our
right,
context, people aren't on death row, obviously. We wouldn't have access to them on the street. But I
right,
think a lot of people probably in our context have a similar experience of life where they feel, largely due to childhood trauma, maybe some moral injury. And we've been doing a lot of work on trauma in our congregation. People kind of
yeah,
have begun to learn the language, and we've begun to sort of address that more directly. But where people feel like, as you said, they're like a waste of skin, and their life feels
yeah,
hopeless. And if there's hope for someone, and in a lot of cases, I think what people don't realize about homelessness is that there is some hope of kind of getting out of it in certain cases, and then in other cases there's not a lot of hope of like ever building a life that most people would want. Like, you might be able to get housed, but it's going to be
right,
sort of rough looking forward. And as I hear you talking about and just kind of thinking about people who know that their life is going to come to a violent end, that they're going to be in
right,
prison for the rest of their life,
right,
but still finding a way to live a redemptive life, to find
right,
love and hope and transformation, even in that context. I mean, that's so inspiring, because
yeah,
even folks in our congregation or in our context that don't, that may never escape addiction. This has been a heavy thing for us to process because addiction, especially particular thin meth, is so hard to get all the way
hmm,
through.
yes,
We always hope that
yes,
people can get there, but even if people are never going to sort of be entirely free from that particular imprisonment, there's still hope for transformation and
mm,
to kind of sense the love of God in its fullness. And I don't know, it's just
yeah,
something I'm just kind of reflecting that
yeah,
back because something that I don't know, that just kind of got me thinking about the spiritual dynamics of our context as well. And
right,
inspiring. Thank you.
right. Well, in fact, one of my friends, just very recently, one of my innocent friends who's on the row. And by the way, there are a ton of innocent people on the row that
Mm.
people don't know about. We think we get it right 100% of the time, and it's just not the case at all.
Uh-huh.
But this innocent friend says to me, I quote Jeremiah 29:11 every single morning, "Oh, that I have the plans, I have all these great plans for you to prosper." And I said, "You do know that was written to people in exile, right?
Hmm.
People that were so far away from the place of worship, from the place, from their country, from their homeland. And God is saying, plant here, build your
Hmm.
houses here. This is where you'll prosper." And I said, if death row isn't, the furthest place of exile that I know of, right?
Yeah.
In the United States, I don't know of one that, is more in exile. Like, we put prisons so far away from people. And I said, and God is saying, you'll prosper here. And I said, I said, "That is astounding." Like, that you would say,
Mhm.
like, "Use these, this is your verse," because and he didn't, like, necessarily put it together like that, that it was, in exile. And, because he wonders, like, why, how is it that as an innocent man, he could end up on the road? Like, what are God's plans for him? Like, why is he even there? And, um, it's like with the psalmist in Psalm 44, where he says, all this came upon me when I was being faithful to you. Like,
Yeah.
and so, he's wondering that, but he still feels like God has a plan even there. So,
And yeah, even there, he can find that hope and that comfort.
like,
Yeah, man, so amazing. Are there other things that are kind of, I don't want you to violate any confidence or anything like that. Obviously, you probably share too much of the specifics of what people are processing, but there are other things that are kind of common themes as you talk to, one of the things that strikes me, my favorite author is Dostoevsky, who very famously was
um,
on death row himself, and a
um,
lot of the profundity of his work and thought came from this experience where I think he was even brought before a firing squad and then pulled out at the last minute, and then did a lot of his writing after that. I mean, that experience of just sort of recognizing that the end has come, it's got to be such a rich place for spiritual reflection.
yeah,
What are
yeah.
people processing? What are they like? What are they sharing with those of us who have not had that experience?
Well, and they think so deeply theologically. I have my friend who was executed up in Virginia used to every single time that we would get together, he would look at me, and like really stare at me, and then he go, "I know what I wanted to ask you," and then he would throw some theological zinger at me, and I always had to laugh because it was just like something I would have never thought of. They didn't teach us these things at Duke Divinity. And like, are there ghettos in heaven?
Mm,
Are there ghettos in heaven? Like,
yeah,
he didn't need the mansion. He was fine with the cardboard box. You know what I mean? Like, he
yeah,
was, and I'm like, and it kept me giggling all the way out of the prison. I'm like, ghettos in heaven, are there? Like, I don't know. Maybe there are. I don't think so, but they think very deeply about, like, I have one friend who always brings scripture that he's wrestling with to our time together. And, he'll think about it in some little nuanced way that I'm just like, from my center, my middle class, or upper middle class upbringing, like, right, I don't bring that cultural context to the scripture. And so he
mhm,
brings it, and we sit there together and we look at like all the ramifications. Like another friend, he wanted to look at the Lazarus story like for weeks on end.
no,
And his number one question was, why did Jesus go into the tomb?
mm.
Why
Why did
did
he go into
Jesus go into
Lazarus' tomb?
tomb?
Yeah,
Yeah, he's like, he said, "Oh, it's gonna be smelly and stinky, and the body's been in there for 4 days and hasn't been embalmed or anything." Like, so why did Jesus go in?
mm.
Jesus always enters the smelliness of our lives. So why doesn't Jesus go in? Jesus sends others in. Like questions like that where I'm like, uh don't have an answer.
Yeah,
And of
but
course I don't answer questions. I mean, that's the thing is that it's their processing, it's their book, it's their page, it's not
right,
mine. So I'm always saying, I don't know. That's a really great question. Like what, how do you see that? How do you process it? Do you believe that Jesus enters the smelliness of your life? Right.
yeah,
Like,
right,
so I always turn it back on them just to hear because their insights are amazing. I always say that my ministry is with them. It isn't
mhm,
to them. A lot of people think that I bring some program or something. All I do is I just show up and I'm with them and I learn from them just as much as they learn from me. I probably actually end up in the better position because they are, I just have friends that have like, they study scripture, like, they
Right.
don't it's yeah, so
It's the same with hospital chaplaincy. I think there's certain folks that think you're in there, kind of trying to evangelize a last minute before someone dies or something. And that's really not what we're
Mhm.
typically doing. We're helping people
Yeah,
draw on the spiritual resources that they already have and
that's
process the
right.
work that they're doing. And just like in the prison, I'm sure in the hospital, people are in bed for a long time and have a lot of time to think and process
Right,
things that they maybe haven't before. They have
right.
time to grieve things that they haven't grieved because they've distracted
Yeah,
themselves. They're
yeah,
thinking about the implications of, what how is this going to change my life? If I get out of here, I'm not going to be able to
right.
eat like I wanted to, or I'm not going to be able to walk or be mobile,
Y
or and so just processing those heavy questions, and then of
Yeah,
course, the questions around grief. And what you're
mhm.
doing is really facilitating their own spiritual process instead of trying to like impose yours onto them. Yeah.
Exactly. And you're talking about grief, and I we do a lot of anticipatory grief,
Uh-huh.
because especially those with it's just called dates. They don't call it execution dates, they just call them dates. So when they have a date, being able to sit with somebody and process, like, okay, so what's going to happen, and they have to play the tape forward to figure out, like, so I'll be in the cell off the death chamber for, this many hours or this many days, and then I'll go in with the correctional officers, they'll lay me down. Like, they have to think through the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And they need somebody who they can trust to not, fall apart, and be able to grieve that and grieve the loss of, all their losses, right? All their friendships, all their family, like, and to really kind of figure all of that out.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
it,
that's gonna be I'm imagining some of these folks are thinking about what kind of legacy, if that's the right way to say it,
yeah,
like what they're leaving behind. And,
yeah,
those moments are gonna be some of the most public moments of the rest of their life. And I'm
yeah,
sure they're also gonna be some of the most stressful and intense moments. So
yeah,
I'm guessing they're trying to figure out, kind of prepare themselves to go through with some sense of dignity. And,
yes.
and what are their goals in that? Like, what are people typically looking at as they head into the
Well,
chamber?
you're exactly right. I mean, unfortunately, before executions, our media loves to typically talk about, their crimes over and over again and the horrific nature of it. And that they're very, usually those articles are, very detailed, and what happened. And so the guys, worry about, like you're saying, their legacy, and is this going to be the sum of my life,
Right.
right? Is this going to be, um, and being able to think about that, like, what is there? What can they leave behind? Um, I have several of the guys that love now to write or put together poems, and I started a little Facebook. I mean, it's little
Uh-huh.
Facebook page called Testimonies Behind the Wire, and it's a space where they can at least get their words put out there and their thoughts put out there, and their testimonies of how God has changed them, um, and, those kinds of things, like, really do matter because, my friend in Virginia just lamented greatly that he would only be known by his crime.
Yeah.
And he had to come to grips with the fact that most likely that is the way people would remember him,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And I knew somebody so totally different, who brought incredible amounts of joy. He was one of my best friends. He always called me church lady, which I always loved. Church lady. You know? So
Yeah.
anyhow, but yeah,
Yeah. How do you
it,
wrestle with like the complexity of that? Like the difference between the person that you're seeing and the person that, and again, you shared you don't look up people's crimes and stuff. I'm sure they share some of what they've done. And how do you wrestle with that complexity in your own sort of processing?
I guess for me, it's about the here and now, like who they
Hmm.
are in this present moment. Um, I know that, like I said, some of my friends have done truly horrific things, but when I look into their eyes, and I just don't see that. I just don't see that. So I just try to stay in the here and now, in
There's no
this moment that we have together. Um, and um, and that's the way I deal with it. I know certain people think that um I may just I mean, I love, love, love all my friends, and sometimes they think that I forget about the victim, and I don't.
you know,
The victims are actually at the top of my prayer list,
you know,
and the victims' families, and even the correctional officers that take part in these executions. I pray for them every single day
yeah,
because, you know, that's I can't imagine it. I can't
yeah.
imagine if somebody killed my son. Like,
Mm.
I haven't had that happen in my life where somebody close to me has been murdered. So, always keep in other words, I always keep the victim in mind, and that they are grieving and forever will grieve, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we don't
Mm.
stop grieving these kinds of losses. So,
Yeah, and I think we can't do everything all at once,
right,
and
right.
there's a place, hopefully people who are families of victims or victims themselves
Yep.
have other folks in their lives or around them, and they're probably going through their own spiritual processing, and your particular calling is to these guys who
Right.
are at least the alleged perpetrators or the
Yes.
perpetrators. And I kind of feel the same actually with the folks downtown, on the street. There's a lot of people downtown that have hurt people in their lives, or as they say, hurt people.
That's
And
right.
I have known other folks. I've had family and other people who have had their kids or loved ones that have fallen to the street and gone into addiction and done terrible things on the way down. And I feel for them too. But like my role and my calling is to be here in this place with these people and to be there
Yeah.
for them. And I have to sort of trust that folks on the other end of it are that God's taking care of them, and you called someone
Yeah.
else to them. That's a hard thing to
Yeah.
do sometimes because you bear the weight. As I'm just kind of beginning to learn and think a little bit more about the moral injury side of things. Like we've talked and learned a lot
Yep.
about trauma in the last few years, but the kind of bearing the weight of responsibility for actions that we've taken or participated in. That's a
Yep.
kind of whole nother ball game, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And the depth of sorrow is quite profound. I mean, you know, like I say, the tapes don't end. Like we think that, maybe these guys, just they're just sitting on the row, and, that they have a bed and they've got 3 meals a day, and life can't be, they've got tablets, so life can't be really that bad, but it really is because of that that the trauma of the crime, the trauma of their childhood, the trauma, right? Like all those trauma tapes that just won't shut off,
Uh-huh.
and it is quite torturous, the whole thing. So, and as the only way to heal trauma is through the trauma, like,
Right.
and it has to come to light. And so, it's a long, long process, but it can
Yeah.
happen. It can happen.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I've been witness.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful work that you do. How do you handle it? I mean, you've got to be carrying so much emotion and so much spiritual trauma and drama yourself. Like, how do you keep yourself revitalized and refreshed? And I know this week it sounds like you're kind of on a marathon visit tour as you're traveling. It's got to be a lot, right? Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, and, the number one thing that I had to learn was just to grieve and grieve well,
Really?
and, uh, you know, after the executions, if I'm on aisle 4 in the grocery store and I pick up Starbucks coffee and that triggers, the memory of being at Starbucks right before the execution, and getting a hug from my favorite manager, that, and I start bawling, I just bawl. I just
Mm.
sob. And people will pass me by and look at me and wonder, like, what's wrong with that person? And a couple will ask me if I'm okay, but I just have to get it out.
Yeah.
I can't hold in this toxicity. And the other thing is I do is I write a lot. I
Mm.
write and reflect. I look at different scriptures. I listen. So like, like the Lazarus story, with my friend, I have looked at that story from all sorts of different angles. I've taken different parts of the scripture. I write about it. I write about it in terms of the things that I've learned from them,
Mhm.
and so that helps me process all this going, all that I'm hearing, and that helps a lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I have to get it out of my body. I can't hold it.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people about grief all the time. Like you said there, you have to just go through it. You can't hide from
Yeah,
it. And the more you push it down, and there's some times where it's helpful. You just need a distraction for a minute here and there, and that's okay. But
right.
ultimately you're gonna have to face it.
That's right.
And facing it can be really, really challenging.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything that you feel like the folks on death row would want to share with the outside world? Like any insight or witness that they have for us? I know you've shared some things already, but is there anything that we should kind of have ears to hear from someone who's in the room?
I think they would all like you to know. I mean, th- I actually asked the guys one time when I was going to do a presentation, what one thing would you want them to know? And they said that we're human.
Mm.
And I think too, over all these years, I've been doing this now for 10 and a half years. And I think they would also say that they are people of great faith,
Mm.
and that they have worth, and that they are also called beloved, and that they can claim that belovedness, um, and that they really are people worth getting to know, and uh, and they their life has meaning and worth as well as mine does. So yeah, those are
Absolutely.
the things. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if there's anyone who Christ came to redeem, it's others who were executed by the state as he was, and we see him
Amen.
forgiving people who are also on death row from the
Right.
cross, those on his right and left. And
Right.
there is at least if we are followers of Jesus, and we have to believe in the redemptiveness of his work, that stretches even to those who've done horrible things, even to those who've been
Hmm.
condemned by the world, by the state,
Yeah.
by society, and there's hope even there.
Right.
Um,
Amen.
well, I'm really
Amen.
grateful for your time. Is there anything else that you want us to know about your work or about you, or any other things that we should kind of share with our listeners today?
I think the only other thing that I will just say, and just to reiterate, is that there are innocent people there,
Hmm.
and that um not everybody's guilty. And I think we as a society think everybody is guilty that's on there. And I have a innocent friend, Robert Roberson, who has an execution date of October 17th right now. And the New York Times just put out a video of the lead detective meeting with Robert and asking him for forgiveness, because he is just so feeling so guilty that he put Robert on the row, and he can't stand it because he now knows that there actually was no crime. That Robert's 2-year-old died of pneumonia complications, and this lead detective has been trying so hard to get the courts to listen, and it went to the Supreme Court and they wouldn't even listen to the case. And so we want to believe that the courts get it right all the time, and the courts, these appeals processes will work perfectly, and they just don't. They
Yeah.
don't. And so that's what I'd like to,
Yeah,
yeah,
thank you for that.
reiterate.
And Yeah, thank you for that. And we even in my last interview with Eric Paul, who's a pastor friend of mine who does restorative justice work, we talked a little
Yes.
bit about some of the faults in our current justice system, and a
Yes.
lot of our folks in our congregation know very well the way that things go
Oh,
oftentimes. Yeah.
I would love for restorative justice to be used
Gosh.
everywhere for every
Yes.
case. Like,
Absolutely.
oh my goodness, because the victims are left out.
Yes.
It's the state versus, the defendant, and the victims are left out. And in restorative justice, the victims have a say, and it should be used everywhere for everything. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Carrie, thank you so much for joining
And
me. It's so good to reconnect. I'm
yeah,
just so blessed to know you, and
I
appreciate
feel the
following your
same.
story on Facebook. If you have a chance, you can find Carrie on Facebook. Is there anywhere they can look for those stories that you were sharing, the writing of the folks on the row? I think you shared the website
It's
earlier.
Testimonies Behind the Wire, and I'm the only Cari, Cari, Rush Willis out on Facebook, so
All
you can
right.
find me easily. So,
All right. We'll find you there and look
okay,
forward
I'll
to
sign
continuing
off
to.
with how I always sign off. This is a sign for I love you, so I love you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Carrie. All right.
Okay.